Hello, my name is Bernadetta and welcome to my channel. This is my first video, so I'm sure it will be terrible, but I love watching booktubers talk about books and book recommendations and reading vlogs, so I wanted this channel to be about that. So if you like book content, I hope you follow along. It's currently January, and for my first video, I wanted to go over all of the books I read in 2023. There aren't that many books. I picked up reading again in October. So during those last 3 months of the year, I read 23 books in the romance and fantasy genre. So let's get into it. The first book I read was All Roads Lead Here by Mariana Zapata. This is a new adult contemporary romance about a woman who's moving back to her hometown. It's a grumpy sunshine, slow burn romance. It was a little too slow for me, but if that's something you enjoy, then you'll definitely like this because it's very slow burn. I gave this 2 stars on Goodreads because there were just some aspects of it that I didn't enjoy, and it took too long to get to the romance, which is generally my favorite part of the book. The next book I read was It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. This is an adult contemporary romance, also a grumpy sunshine, about a woman named Piper who's sort of a party girl influencer in Beverly Hills, but her stepfather cuts her off financially until she can prove that she's responsible. So she moves to a small fishing town where she tries to restore a bar and turn it into a thriving business. And along the way, she meets a fisherman, Brendan, and they fall in love, and she basically has to decide if she wants to go back to her old life or stay with him. This was a really fun book to read. I really enjoyed the story and the romance between them, and there were a few spicy scenes, overall fast-paced, and I gave it 4 stars. Then I switched gears to fantasy, and these books were recommended by a lot of booktubers as a great intro into fantasy. They're not super heavy on the world building, they're easy to follow, generally fast-paced, a lot of action scenes, a few spicy scenes, and they are the Empyrean series by Rebecca Yarros. Fourth Wing is the first one in the series. This follows the main character, Violet Sorrengail, who goes to Basgiath War College, where she's training to be a dragon rider. It's an enemies to lovers, and the love interest is Xaden Ryerson. There is magic, dragons, friend groups. Overall, just a really fun read. I moved on to Iron Flame, which is book 2 of the series, and this one focuses more about the war. Both of them were really enjoyable to read. I gave them both 3 stars on Goodreads. I was going back and forth a little bit, especially on book 2 because the pacing was a little bit slow and there were some sections where I was kind of bored. But it did pick up a lot towards the end, like the last 14 chapters or so, and I enjoyed it. So I will be continuing with this series when the next book comes out. The next book I read was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab, and this is a 5-star read. If you have not read this book, you have to go read it. You have to go read it. This is an adult fantasy about the main character, Addie LaRue, who basically sells her soul to the devil for immortality, but she's tricked and she ends up having to live the rest of her time being forgotten by everybody she meets. So basically, if she meets somebody and then leaves a room or is out of sight for a moment, they immediately forget about her. Until one day when she meets the love interest, Henry, who remembers her. This book follows 2 timelines, present day, where she knows Henry, and the past, which is very interesting to read about. The writing of this book is so lyrical, so beautiful. I absolutely love this book. The next book I read was the longest book of the year at 817 pages, and that was Midnight Sun by Stephenie Meyer. And this is Edward's version of Twilight. So if you've read Twilight, this is the same story, but just in Edward's POV. I love Twilight. It is still one of my favorite series ever. And this one is reading the same story again, like you're reading it for the first time, just in a different POV. Immediately 5 stars. Books 7 through 15 were the Shatter Me series by Tahreh Mafi, and this is a YA series. There are 9 books in here, and 3 of these are novellas. It is about a girl named Juliet in a dystopian society where she's basically born with this thing where if anybody touches her, they basically die. There is a lot of action in these books. They're very fast-paced, very fast to get through. It's really enjoyable to read. I personally thought they were a little too young for me, but I still really enjoyed reading them, and overall I would give the series 3.5 stars. Then we switched gears to holiday because it was December, and the first holiday-themed book I read was All I Want for Christmas is a Cowboy by Jessica Clare. This story is about a woman named Cass who lives in New York, and she ends up going to her parents' cabin in Wyoming for the holidays to get away from her boss's terrible boyfriend. On her way there, she gets stuck in a blizzard, gets in a car accident, and gets saved by the cowboy named Eli. Wakes up with memory loss. They're stuck in his cabin alone together due to the snowstorm. And while she's trying to remember who she is, they fall in love over the holidays. I gave this book 4 stars because it was a really fun read, but the third act breakup was kind of silly in general. Still really enjoyed it and will read more books by this author. Next winter themed book I read was A Winter in New York by Josie Silver. This is a contemporary romance, no spice. I got this book from Book of the Month for the holiday New York winter vibes, and it was a really cute story. This is about the main character, Iris, who moves to New York because her mother used to live there and she died, and she wanted to feel closer to her by doing all the things that her mom told her about. So she meets the family of the man that her mom used to be in love with, and it turns out she has their secret family gelato recipe, which they now need, but she can't tell them that she has it because it's supposed to be a secret. In order to help them, she tells them she's a chef and basically tries to recreate the recipe. It's set mainly in the winter season and it feels like a cozy read, but a lot of the issues could have been avoided because she lied. So overall, I gave this book 3 stars. The next book I read was on my Kindle, and that was Resting Scrooge Face by Megan Quinn. This was actually a novella. It was 80 pages, so it was the shortest book of the year. I flew right through it. It was about the main character, Nola, who moves back to her hometown in Maine. Her ex still lives there, and I don't remember exactly how they came to write each other letters, but basically the mailman decides to play matchmaker and delivers the letters to each of them, and neither of them know who the letter is from, and they connect over their mutual lack of holiday spirit. I loved the banter in that story. It was really cute and romantic, and I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read was The Wish by Nicholas Sparks. This book is set in the holiday season. It follows the main character, Maggie, who is a famous photographer, and she's basically telling her life story to her coworker. It's set in 2 timelines, the past, where she's a teenager and accidentally gets pregnant and then gets sent away to live with her aunt. She ends up meeting a boy in town who's her tutor, and he teaches her photography, which is how she discovers her passion. In the present timeline, she is sick with cancer and she's living out her last days, telling that story to her coworker, who is a big fan of her work. It was a sad book. If you know Nicholas Sparks, you know he writes sad books, generally centered around people who are sick and dying. I definitely cried several times throughout this book, so keep that in mind before you pick it up. I ended up giving it 4 stars because the story is just so emotional. The next holiday book I read was also on Kindle. It was called The Last Phone Booth in Manhattan by Beth Merlin. It is a story about a woman named Avery who is engaged to this guy. He commits a lot of crimes, so they both get arrested, but she ends up being released because she was an innocent and she didn't know anything about it. She comes across a magical phone booth where she tries to call a cab when she's released from the prison, but the phone booth actually sends her to her ex's house instead. She comes across this phone booth again later in the story, where it leads her to an audition for a musical and helps her pursue her career. It's a cute story, not super heavy on the romance, but I still enjoyed it and I gave it 3 stars. To keep going with the cozy winter vibes, I picked up Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. It's a low-stakes cozy fantasy, and that's exactly what it was. It's about an orc who is trying to open the first ever coffee shop in a new town. This book is very descriptive on the coffee scenes and the pastries, and overall just makes you feel very cozy, and I basically had to have a toasty beverage with me the entire time I was reading this. It was really cute, I enjoyed it, and I gave it 3 stars. Then to finish off the year, I read Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. It is about 2 people, Roman and Iris, who are competing for the same job as columnist for the newspaper. They both inherit these magical typewriters from their grandmothers and develop into a relationship by writing letters to each other. It starts with Iris trying to write a letter to her brother who's off at war, and she sends it under the wardrobe, but it goes to Roman instead. This book ends on a major cliffhanger, so I couldn't wait to get to book 2, but I absolutely loved the story. I loved the writing. I loved the romance between them. Immediately 5 stars. Ruthless Vows is the second book, and it continues their story, but this one is mainly focused on the war, and Roman and Iris are separated for the majority of this book. Here you get more background on the gods and why they're at war with each other, which is still very interesting to read, but I just didn't love it quite as much as Divine Rivals, and I gave this one 3 stars. And that's it. Those were the 23 books I read in 2023, and my top reads were The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue and Divine Rivals. Let me know if you've read any of these books, and comment below what your favorite book is. See you soon.